thank you for the recognition of land. I also am Zooming you from Ghana land. When Paz originally approached me to be involved, it was partly because of my link with the council election, the forthcoming council elections, and my past experience as a councillor for the Port Adelaide Council. But I've also been an active community and union organiser and have been on the executive of our local branch of the National Trust in the Port of Adelaide in a range of positions for many years. So I thought I might talk about our branch and how we have worked and how we have picked up some of the issues that both Marty and Shane have been talking about in terms of regrouping and organising ourselves to be more effective. So our branch formed to campaign primarily around the waterfront redevelopment in Port Adelaide. And we were very specific in that we were interested in the maintenance of maritime and working class heritage. So we invited Jack Mundy, which some of you may remember, the BLF union organiser who was famous for saving the Sydney Rocks area in the heyday of union power, doing that sort of thing by doing green bans, which of course is now illegal. We were suitably inspired by Jack's campaign and his enthusiasm for heritage and for community action. And so we formed a branch and have specifically remained an advocacy branch rather than running as a lot of National Trust, not all, but a lot of National Trust branches are devoted to running particular facilities and maintaining particular collections of heritage items. We've run a number of advocacy campaigns, and we've certainly felt the pain of losing many campaigns, and we almost folded due to the resultant loss of enthusiasm from our members. A lot of you may remember our more recent campaign around Shed 26, and also we've just been running a campaign around Shed 1, which is also known as Fisherman's Wharf, which is the last original shed on the inner harbour, and sadly is in private hands and has been approved for demolition. We had a very interesting experience under the new development code in presenting to around that demolition application, in which the panel basically gave us the feedback that if they had the capacity under the legislation, they would have stopped the demolition, but they had no capacity. So it was a really interesting illustration of the need to work at several levels in a campaign. And it's why we have always attempted to not only work at a local level, but also at a systems change level. But it also picks up the points that Marty has been making in terms of the need to keep people involved and enthusiastic, because that campaign, and even the most recent one, has had the effect of, disillusioning a lot of members who were previously very involved, and a lot of loss of enthusiasm. And so I suppose one of the things that I've done and have brought to my work as a community activist is, my past union activist training, which used a model of anger, hope, and action. Anger's always a good motivator. It gets people going and stirred up, and invariably it involves, someone else should do something about that. Hope is where you are tapping into a bigger picture, making the individual connection, inspiring that something could be different. And action, of course, is that translation of both into an achievable campaign. And Marty talked about achievable chunks, and that's certainly what we've tried to do. It's also really important to make sure that you do move on from anger and, from its flip side, depression. I moved in with a Buddhist some years ago, and anger has come under critical review in our household. It's been important for me as I spend a lot of time being angry, and under previous governments, a lot of time feeling depressed about our ability to make change. Despair is never good, and I think a lot of activists are increasingly stuck in despair. It's hard to avoid. It's debilitating, and it alienates people from taking action and being involved in change. It basically makes people feel powerless and defeatist. When our branch regrouped, we cut back on our actions and, importantly, our meetings to what we thought we would cover. We did what Shane described in the Parklands work of looking at our planning and our strategic direction. We also looked at what Marty was explaining in terms of a review of individual load and where we could use people's best skills, because we'd basically worn people out. We learned how to say no, not to have a great big list of campaigns. And we identified clear priority. We opened up new ways of meeting, quarterly, Zoom, in homes, and of expanding ways of being involved. Members might just join in a campaign for that project rather than our general committee meetings. And we concentrated a bit more on having more fun. Some of that celebration, some of the funny and amusing actions that could engage a different range of people. So picking up with the working with council and Paz's point about wanting people to be engaged with the forthcoming local elections, it's been an interesting experience in establishing who has power in development applications. And like I explained with our experience with Shed 1, we've found that while individual councillors always say they are pro-heritage, well, at least ours do, and we agree as a branch that that doesn't necessarily mean that you are not also pro-development. I think both can happen. These councillors don't tend to have an agenda of their own, but are more responsive to what comes up. Often they say, I'm here to represent the community. But imagine if state and local governments use that position. People elect you because you have an agenda. I certainly expect people to be representing an agenda of action. And what being responsive means is that their work is always reactive and spasmodic, which often it is on council and certainly for a lot of councillors. But that's not a very effective way of implementing a strategy. We want councillors who subscribe to an agenda of action on heritage, specific action, and who can name that agenda and be accountable for the achievements against it. Similarly, we've found that our lobbying of council staff has been less effective when done spasmodically, and we've moved to establishing a regular quarterly meeting with key council staff as a more effective way of exchanging information and monitoring action. And we've deliberately kept that agenda specific. So instead of adding new things on every time, we have kept to a consistent agenda to hold people to that agenda. So that's been quite important because, we'd all like to change everything, but we have been we've tried to be a bit more strategic in terms of not reacting to every issue that arises, but planning ahead and working on longer term campaigns. And we've certainly found that fighting the long fight is a key part of holding people accountable to slow change, because that's invariably what it is. We've very consciously developed partnerships with other groups to add to the critical mass of our campaigns. So we've stayed with a number, just to give you some examples, on the waterfront development, we've certainly developed a range of partnerships, and most recently with our local history society, which hasn't been a very politically active nor advocating society up until now. In the past, we've worked on the quarantine station out at Torrens Island, and we established a very good partnership with the Friends of Torrens Island. And more recently, the current campaign that I'm working on is around significant trees. As you know, National Trust has a natural heritage as well as built heritage brief. And when I went to have a look at even the National Trust's list of significant trees in the West, there were only one listing, and that was for the palms that run down the centre of Port Road. So I know from personal experience that the subdivision of land in this area is resulting in significant trees, and even trees that are trying to be significant, being knocked over. And a lot of those trees are held on private land. So this project is working with the community to identify significant trees and campaign for their preservation. And I've got a quick presentation on that if we have time later, or if it's an area of interest for people, we can revisit it. But rather than take up discussion time, I'll let us move on for our next speaker, because personally I'm very interested in what you've got to say as well, Dun. So I'll end it there.